Hello, and welcome once again to our latest Stanford Brown SB Talks podcast. Today I am joined by Stanford Brown partner and private wealth advisor Andrew Griffin to talk a bit about his most recent white paper, How Much Do I Need in Retirement? Welcome, Andrew.
Thank you, Vincent. It's very good to be here. I've been wanting to be on this podcast for years now, so I'm glad that I've finally made it.
It's good of Ashley to let you have a turn.
Indeed.
Now, for those of you that don't know Andrew, he has just ticked up his 10 years service at Stanford Brown, looking after a number of our private client groups. And he has a particular specialism in looking after those that are planning for and preparing for life after full-time work or retirement. Andrew, let's start with what has drawn you to this area of specialism. How did you... You're about 30 now, or are you just 30, 31? What's drawn you to focus on the retiree segment?
Very generous there, Vincent. Close to 40. Look, when I joined Stanford Brown and when I started my advice career, it's very normal to be in front of a vast array of different clients, of different backgrounds and different stages in their lives. And what I really did enjoy through the journey was the whole idea of pre-retirement planning and beyond. I think those people I have a general affinity for, I honestly do. But also there's a lot of great strategic work that you can do with them. A lot of good pre-planning, and really those clients have worked their whole lives to get to this point. Generated this large amount of a nest egg that needs to last. And that's something I take really seriously and really enjoy doing. I do also enjoy coupling that great strategic and money management work with the non-financial aspects as well, which I think some people do struggle with the transition into retirement. And I found that I was curious about that because you work your whole life.
The lifestyle switch there, the social element to it?
Indeed. You work your whole life to then want to enjoy yourself after full-time work, whatever that looks like for an individual. And I just found it fascinating that some people, and disappointing sometimes, that some people could struggle through that transition. And I was just curious to go deeper there. And that's where some of my reading that is not to do with financial things has led me.
Well, no doubt that'll be another white paper and another podcast for another day. A very interesting topic. Let's switch and focus on the white paper that you've just written, and specifically focusing on how much do I need, or how much do I need in retirement. Yes. What led you to develop this white paper?
Yeah, well, it's the question on everyone's lips. It literally is. We get asked that from clients of all different ages, actually. We get asked that from people in their 70s, 80s, but also we get asked that for clients that are potentially in their 30s or 40s, needing to prepare for that. So I just wanted to distill what is an enormous amount of literature that's out there into our view on things, because I actually, in my reading, found it very confusing and very diverse, the amount of sort of different approaches that are out there.
So maybe there's a huge universe of information out there. Why don't we let's start by unpacking some of that. That's maybe even, how did you categorize that? What are some of the key things that you found?
Yeah, there is so much out there, but I was drawn to two main approaches just because they were so diverse. Yeah. There's the low end, which is ASFA, have a determined, what they determine to be a comfortable level of retirement spending. And for a couple homeowner, they determine that to be a spending rate of $62,000 per annum.
Right.
It may actually be 65 now, just in the most updated version.
But that's a publicly available guidance on what you might think you need as an ongoing income to support yourself in a comfortable. As they have determined retirement, and they break that down into a variety of categories.
They do, yes, they do indeed. And the categories themselves, let's say on a weekly basis, you might spend $200-ish on food, close to $300 on leisure, 150 on transport, 180 on health. It's a certain amount, but there's not a lot else. Not a huge amount of travel per annum, for instance. A small budget for that, and not the sort of cars or the renovations or anything of that nature.
Or the family assistance or other things that might come along. And I guess travel's one of those things where you could possibly have a $3,000 trip or a $30,000 trip very easily. Yeah.
Some of us do, yes, indeed.
And so you talk of two main pillars that you look. So there's the ASFA, the sort of technical analysis, which is a comfortable retirement, or not necessarily everyone's view of a comfortable retirement, but at least it's one stake in the sand. What else is out there?
Well, just back on that quickly, the ASFA, the 62,000 per annum, they say you need a capital amount of 640,000 to achieve that.
So that's sort of almost a 10% yield off that capital, or I guess you have other potential income sources at play there, such as government assistance.
Correct. So that assumes, if you were just drawing on that portfolio to be 10% a year, and you would assume that would run out very quickly. But the factors at play there are obviously a high reliance on the age pension. But I'll talk about that and the challenges of that approach. Which I think is too low. That is my opinion in my dealings with many retirees over the years. But the other approach in the high end is a whole bunch of literature out there on safe withdrawal rates.
Yes.
And there's a thing called the 4% rule. So basically a whole bunch of literature saying that if you draw each year, at the start of every year, you determined 4% of your capital base.
Yeah.
And each year you recalculated that and drew 4% of your portfolio every single year, then under most market scenarios, i.e. the vast majority of market scenarios historically that have happened, you would never run out of money.
Okay.
And
so sometimes termed the safe withdrawal rate.
It is, yes. And the reality of that 4% rule is that if you divide a capital figure by 4%, that is the capital you would need to create that. So on that 62,000 that ASFA said you need 640 for, the 4% rule says that you need
quickly do the numbers in your head.
No, I've got it just on my laptop here, Vin. Over 1.5 million.
Right. So quite a stark, almost triple the amount there.
Yeah. So that's what's curious for me is reading all of that and going, okay, there are these different approaches, but 640, 1.5 million.
And as you can imagine, for anyone trying to Dr. Google it and work out the solution for their own retirement, they're two hugely contrasting messages.
Massively. And so my aim in writing this white paper was to say, okay, it's very vast, that's confusing. What is the sort of Stanford Brown's view? Is there a middle ground, or what are the factors at play that determine how much do I need?
So what is your approach? How do you, if someone was to come through your door, start to think about that life after full-time work area, what's the approach that you take them through?
Yeah, so obviously any good financial planner will want to get to know their client, whether they're a single couple or a family that you're in front of, deeply. Know, and the better you know them, the better and more tailored your advice would become. So a deep knowledge of their circumstances, their goals for the future, and all of the factors that may be at play or may change during that journey. So you can create a robust financial plan to start with, which is all pretty standard practice. Yeah. But then the runway and how that might and inevitably will change is the value in ongoing advice. So how do we deal with it? We have very regular discussions and meetings with clients to have a sense check of have there been any changes, or what are we preparing for? And also perhaps some live modeling I find really useful with clients, just as a tracking tool, a sense check of what if markets actually don't go to plan for the next 10 years? Are we still going to be okay? Or what sorts of things might we need to adjust during that journey? So that's typically how that looks at a pretty high level.
Yeah. So you talk about the things that they might adjust. What are some of the levers might be open. There's an obvious starting point. Obviously, have as much money as you possibly can going into it. But what else? What else do you consider as part of the different things that affect that path, their journey through retirement?
Yeah, thank you. How much you spend is there are things that are inside your control and things that are outside of your control. So let's first start with some things that are inside of your control. So how much you spend is an obvious one that is inside of your control. And what I have found is that people come to us with maybe a figure that they feel that they would spend in retirement. And often it's not necessarily based on a formal budget that they've done or any sort of formal process to get to that figure. It might be what their mates are spending potentially, or a figure that felt reasonable.
Or something possibly even less scientific than that. I've certainly seen encounters where someone came with a figure, and once the analysis was done, that the figure that ultimately was appropriate was between double and treble the original amount. And probably worth saying, that's not uncommon.
Not uncommon, but critical to do, because any great financial plan, that's one of the biggest factors. How much you spend is enormous. And in my experience as well, back on that 4% rule, that's quite impractical, I think, because I've never come across a retiree that spends in a linear fashion.
Yeah.
Often they spend a lot more in their initial retirement years while they're fit, healthy, they travel, they do work on their home, they buy the car, and there's generally a lot more lifestyle spending happening there. And they spend maybe less later, let's say into their mid to late 70s or 80s. And then it's always good to prepare, obviously, for health-related costs and aged care funding for the future as well.
Potentially later in life, the retirement spending smile.
Yeah, that's right, and that's in the white paper, and it's a concept that I deeply believe in, because I just don't think that people spend 4% a year. That's just impractical.
And let's probably talk about that, because you talk about people spending more, living life to their fullest in the early years of retirement, and that's absolutely what you absolutely could and should do, because you're fit and healthy and able to travel and do those more exotic trips.
Yeah.
And no one knows what tomorrow brings, so you'd actively encourage people to do that.
But that's where advice can be great, because to give people the confidence and at least to be able to have a long-term view of that, based on some different scenarios, to have the confidence to execute on that and spend a little bit more, which might be a little uncomfortable for some people, is hugely valuable. And you want people to enjoy their life. I'm very encouraging. I'm also not afraid to have certain conversations with certain clients that might be spending at an unsustainable level, discussing trade-offs that might need to occur as well.
Tough conversations are always part of it.
Yeah.
So you talk about the levers that are within people's control. So lever number one, major one, spending. What else do you consider?
Thank you. Your retirement date. So perhaps how long you work. Bit of a theme going on at the moment is people working perhaps a little longer, or scaling back their work hours to maybe from 5 to 4 to 3 days per week.
And I was going to say lifestyle as well as probably financial factors at play there.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, definitely. So that's something that's in your control. So for instance, how much you need, levers, maybe work a little bit longer, is one of those. But also, again, a valuable advice can be to give someone the confidence to literally make that retirement decision if they want to.
Yeah. Well, do you mind me asking you a question? What do you find? Do people want to go cold turkey, work 60 hours a week, and then pull up stumps and and go to sort of straight to the beach or straight to the golf club?
I've seen a vast array of approaches, and one size does not fit all.
Yeah.
But as a generalization, sometimes the people that struggle with the transition are those that go from full-blown 5 days a week to nothing, but haven't maybe even given much envisaging towards their life after and tried different things.
What a fulfilling life might look like in retirement.
Yeah, because trialing retirement is a concept that's out there that I believe in, certainly, and just sort of getting in that zone or headspace and maybe using some long service leave to sort of try that is a great suggestion as well.
Again, no one size fits all.
Yeah. But the other levers that I wanted to talk about, the amount of risk you take in the portfolio is an obvious in your control lever, i.e. we do risk profiling as advisors, and you could be anywhere from conservative, moderate, balanced growth, high growth, not common necessarily with a retiree portfolio. But also within the portfolio management style, that's in your control too. So how your money is managed. And there's a huge, vast array of different approaches there. Obviously, Stanford Brown is more of a proactive way of investing rather than other approaches that can be more sort of set and forget, i.e. we feel that the world changes and we should change with it and take views on certain asset classes at any one time, ideally smoothing risk through the cycles and enhancing returns where possible as well. So a whole different array of approaches, and that's a lever, certainly how your money's managed.
And it comes down to individual tolerance levels very much as well.
Of course, yeah. And the other big one is capital enhancements through the journey, or otherwise, or big capital expenditures that may occur. So capital enhancements, the big ones are inheritances that you may receive, if you're lucky, or downsizing your home is another big one, and quite a lot of clients actually were engaged in providing that particular advice. And there's also reverse mortgages that could play a role there, creating an income stream from your home. A lot of good discussions and planning needs to happen around that, but that's something that can be a lever in your control that you could potentially utilize as well. So they're the inside your controls. Okay. In terms of outside of your control, health. So health is the great unknown.
Yeah.
And that is something that could impact how much you need, I guess. Health costs can be quite large, in terms of ongoing healthcare costs, in terms of aged care funding or home care funding. Complex area, another podcast on that perhaps.
Right.
But certainly to be planned for and appropriate buffers in place.
You're almost saying you got to plan for the worst, and the timing of which might not be under your control at all, but at least build enough contingency into whatever plan you do that you know that if should it end up that way, it's within your control to finance it. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, for sure.
What else is outside of your control that we got to think about?
So, markets,
the double-edged sort of risk. Yeah.
So there is a concept which is little known, but I feel very important in the financial planning, retirement planning, and how long your money might last. And this is the concept of sequence of return risk. Very complex to get into, but at the highest level, two portfolios, identical in construction, both could achieve an average return of 7% a year, for instance. But how they get there could be entirely different. So if we take one that performs badly in the first 10 years of that portfolio, but then recovers and the average is 7, versus another which performs well in the first 10 years and worse later on, again to the average of 7. The way they wash up is entirely different, is enormously different. And I've attempted to paint a simplistic picture of that just to allow people to understand that concept a little bit more, because that's a lever which is not in your control. As Stanford Brown, as our investment committee, thinks a lot about risk, we aim to mitigate sequence of return risk through multiple different strategies in the way we actually physically manage the portfolio, underweighting certain asset classes.
Looking at the assets that you have in the mix in the portfolio, trying to mitigate some of the volatility where you can, and planning for people's spending patterns as much as you can.
Absolutely. And ideally there's a bucket strategy approach where you carve out some very low risk or cash-like investments of sorts to allow you not to need to touch your portfolio whilst markets are very rocky, and allow it to recover ideally. So different approaches can play a good role there to mitigate that. But markets effectively are quite outside of your control, I would say.
And should be planned for the worst, if anything.
And known in advance. So when we do risk profiling, it's a big process, and there's a lot of good conversations that are happening there to really dig deeper. We don't just say, here's your questionnaire result, here's your score, here's your risk profile. No, we physically dig deeper into those results and understand, how would you react if your portfolio fell by a certain, figure? Let's put it in dollar terms, not percentage terms, because that's where it hurts the most. And what sorts of reactions would you make, and just digging deeper to really understand is this level of risk appropriate or otherwise? Because if you know what you're getting into before and the expectations of how those types of risk profiles perform over time historically, what's been the worst year in a balanced portfolio, for instance, back since 1972, our data, and that you can have some expectation that should things like we've seen recently, some volatility, COVID in this year and many times before that, at least there is an expectation that's been set by the advisor. I think that's really, really important.
As we begin to pull the many elements of this together, what would you suggest are your key points or takeaways for someone that's approaching this topic for the first time?
I would just seek some good thought towards the vast array of material here. I would request that they would read my white paper with respect.
That would be a good start, yes.
Knowing that what I am trying to do is distill and have a view on this.
And ultimately almost simplify and make it digestible to the average person that's not from a financial background or studies this area.
Absolutely. And then reflect on it as to their own affairs and planning for the future. And then inevitably, I would expect questions to emanate from that, and I would welcome them. We would welcome them. This is not an easy thing to do. It's full of complexities and forward predictions and uncertainty and changes. And I would really, encourage at least an interaction.
Yeah.
Any interaction that I've had, at least as an educational lens, is always a positive one.
And probably fair to say, people should understand that it's normal to not know or to be confused as they begin to approach this area around how much they think they need, or even how much they think they need to spend. From our perspective, we encounter people from all sorts of different professional backgrounds, all sorts of different demographics and wealth levels, and there's a common theme that people really aren't clear or sure or even knowing how to approach it.
Oh, absolutely. Well, you spent your life being a doctor or a lawyer or an accountant or, an IT specialist. This is a whole world of needing to get this right. And you have worked so hard to get to this point and built this future for yourself, for your family, for your partner in life, potentially. And this is something that I think needs to be taken seriously.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Andrew, for all your hard work and for sharing some of your gems with us today. We look forward to reading the white paper in full and potentially a client event coming up sometime soon.
Yeah, I look forward to that. Look forward to that, Vin. It's great to be back in the land of being able to do presentations, and obviously I'm an extroverted style that enjoys that. So thank you very much.
And thank you again to all the listeners, and watch this space for more from Andrew and this topic. Thanks, Andrew. Thank you all.
Thank you.